A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me on ITV. The Muslim woman is a dynamic and resilient entity. She has always been a pivotal feature in all societies, and it has been through her participation in all walks of life that the honor of the Muslim woman can be fully appreciated. Throughout the ages, from the earliest days of Islam to contemporary times, the Muslim woman has been and continues to be an active leader in her community, in her society, and in countries across the world. And in spite of her modesty and her ability to prioritize her responsibility, Muslim women have always been able to contribute to the family, the community, and to society at large. But undoubtedly, her forte has been in education and in upholding the integrity of the religion. This is most commonly understood through the teachings of the hadith of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, the beloved wife of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and of course the fact that thousands of narrators of hadith, which it has been established are females, have never ever been accused or found guilty of falsification or have been identified as individuals of disrepute. The first instruction, of course, to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by the angel Jibreel was Iqra bi ismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read. And of course, reading, understanding, reflecting in education is the essence and a fundamental part of our deen. Education has been a commitment of the Muslim woman since the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and because it was so important and he himself fully understood and realized this, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kept a special time whereby he would then spend time with the woman, teach them and answer their questions. And if one looks at the tradition of education, then one can acknowledge this through the achievements of Fathima al-Fihri, the daughter of Muhammad al-Fihri, also known as al-Banin, or the mother of the boys. She is known for creating the oldest academic degree-granting university in existence today, the University of Qarawiyyin, which is in Morocco. Fatima and her family were among several families who moved from Tunisia to Morocco during the reign of the Moroccan king Idris II. And when her husband and her brothers died, she and her sister Maryam inherited a large fortune. Both women wanted to devote their money to pious work that would benefit the community in order to receive the blessings of Allah. And to this end, Fatima built the Al-Qarawiyyin Mosque, while Maryam built the Al-Andalus Mosque. From the 10th to the 12th century, the Al-Qarawiyyin Mosque developed into a university, which became an important center of education and one of the first Islamic and most prestigious universities in the world. It is also the oldest degree-granting university in operation, and it was founded by a Muslim woman. In keeping with the tradition of upliftment through education, I would like to introduce my very special guest today, and she is also a Fatima. Fathima Wadvallah is an intern at Wildhunger Hilf, and she's a curriculum advisor and English language educator at Dunshaba International School. She further played a role in curriculum development and English language education at Pioneers Baccalaureate School and has been involved in the Sogang language program. Fatima has traveled extensively to very exciting and unusual cities, which we will be talking about further in the interview. And she has given selflessly of her time and herself in an effort to alleviate through education. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome Fatima to Finding Me on ITV.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thank you for having me here.
Now it's wonderful, and it's really, I think, a groundbreaking opportunity for me to find such a young and dynamic person, and especially when I read all those interesting things that you spoke about or wrote about the cities that you visited. For a moment I was almost envious. I would like to ask you, as a Muslim woman, was it difficult for you to seek higher education?
Not at all. I think the family that I was brought up in was at the same time being liberal yet conservative. So we were brought up having certain morals and values, yet we were never limited in what we could do. It was actually, I wanted to become a pilot, but my parents were urged me to seek a higher education first, get a university degree, and they said, after that you may do whatever you like. And so it was very important to them that myself and my 3 sisters got an education.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, and then, so what made you choose then the field of rural education from being a pilot, now moving into education?
Unfortunately, I have really bad eyesight, so that was ruled out completely.
Okay.
And I wanted to go into something in environment, but I settled for international relations. I had no intention at that point of doing education. I didn't see myself as a teacher. Okay. I wanted to go into the diplomatic field. I graduated and I realized that, nope, that's not for me.
Okay. Great. And then
in that time, I was trying to figure out what I would like to do, and I saw an advertisement to teach English in South Korea. And South Korea was a country that always fascinated me. To be honest, I had not known much about it since the World Cup, since they hosted the World Cup with Japan. And through that, I started learning more about it, and I was like, this is a country that I must visit. And that's how I got into education.
So, but didn't your family tell you that you're crazy? South Korea, right up there, far east? I mean, like, many people don't even know where it is on a map. We don't know what kind of people they are, what religion, what do they eat. Maybe they eat frogs and snakes. And didn't you face all that kind of
True, that's what most people thought. They thought it was in China, and they're like, don't you know what China's like? Like, you're not going to be able to manage over there. But my parents, on the other hand, were very supportive of me going abroad. All my sisters had lived and worked abroad, and they were like, it's your time to leave the nest and go and do what you want. And if this is a country that I chose, then they were more than happy to support me going there. Of course, they had their reservations. They were very worried that I would not be able to find something to eat. But you figure it out. If you can't eat meat, you don't eat meat. You eat vegetables all the time.
Whilst you're on that point, many people who are listening would probably say, what's wrong with their parents? How can they send a girl alone overseas? I mean, don't they care? Are they concerned? You know, didn't those issues, like, our society, our communities are very conservative. Didn't those issues come about, and how did your family or you per se handle those issues and manage with that?
I think the most important thing is not actually listening to what other people say. There's always going to be people trying to put negative thoughts in your head and trying to say that this is bad or this is good, trying to live your life for you. And it's doing what you feel is important to you. Thankfully, my parents are not influenced by those around them. They knew what is important for us, because that's in the end what matters, like, what we do with our lives. And like I said, they brought us up in a very distinct way. They gave us our freedom, yet we were brought up with
values and morals.
Yes. And so we knew what we had to do, and we would follow that. So going abroad was not going to change that. Like, basically, my parents were there on the telephone. They were always there in my life. Like, it wasn't that because I was thousands of miles away, I forgot them.
Out of mind.
Yes, and I forgot everything they had taught me, not at all.
And I think it's very important that parents actually raise their kids, interact with them, communicate with them. Ultimately, then you will know what kind of a child you have and what your child is capable of, isn't it? And if you give the right environment, the right upbringing, you instill the correct values in your child. I mean, as a parent, you're never going to be around 24/7. So you have to know that your child is going to cope. That's very important, isn't it?
Extremely important. If you bring your child up in a suppressive environment where they're not allowed to have free thoughts, free ideas, at some point when they do have that little bit of freedom, they are going to go wild, because now they have that space to be able to do things that they were never allowed to do. And it's not about even doing things that you weren't allowed to do. It's just being able to even express it. And that is, you need to be in an environment where you can express yourself without thinking that somebody is going to judge you on it. And if you are a parent and you bring your child in that way, bring your child up in that way, you're going to have a more rounded individual than somebody who can only think in the way somebody else wants them to think.
Yes, so it's parenting in a controlled environment.
Yes.
You're allowing the development, but within a controlled environment. Before we go into the break, I would just like to mention about Anisa Nakarachi, who is the president and founder of the Noor Association of Solidarity for Rural Women in Morocco. She's also the president of Network Hope Arab Group to Eradicate Early Marriage, which was created in 2011, and its members include countries such as Egypt, Jordan, Mauritania, and Yemen. Anisa felt that it was important to get involved in this project because it aimed at eliminating poverty, vulnerability, precarious situations, and social exclusion. Because women and children, especially in rural areas, are often the most marginalized. And I think it is for this reason also that our very special guest, Fathima, was motivated to get involved and work with people in rural communities. So when we come back, I will raise this question with Fathima. Welcome to Finding Me on ITV. Before we went on the break, I was speaking about the issues or the focuses that motivate young women, especially Muslim women, to choosing a career path. And that's what I would like to ask Fathima next. Fathima, what motivated you to work for an NGO?
So, living in Tajikistan, you're surrounded by NGOs all operating over there. Because Tajikistan is the poorest of the former Soviet countries, poverty is all around you. The average person earns $80 a month, which for us is unbelievable. How can anybody live on that? But yet, the main form of, or the main industry is actually agriculture. When you think of half of the workforce is involved in agriculture, and it's not in the formal sector, it's in the informal sector. So it's all subsistence farming. Now, in a country where you have a very harsh topography, it's 80%, almost 80% mountain, very, very harsh terrain, farming is very difficult, and most of the people depend on farming to survive, to live. And there are only a few crops. Potatoes, I worked in potato seed farming, potatoes, cabbages, and carrots. I ate enough of those. So when you see how that affects the local population, it really motivated me to get involved in rural development. And so I got into rural educational and rural agricultural development, just because I was so aware of how that really affects poverty and how overcoming that can overcome poverty.
And I wanted to know from you, because you said that the majority of the population depends on subsistence farming, are there a lot of women who are involved in farming?
Okay, so here's the catch. Well, a terrifying statistic. 19% of women are in the workforce compared to 80-something% of men, right? And of that 19%, over 65% of them are involved in subsistence farming. So they are directly affected by it, by the poverty. Their families are dependent on them for food. Now, you must also realize that over 1 million men in Tajikistan go to Russia as migrant laborers. So a large percentage of your male workforce and the head of the household is gone. Who can support the family? They send remittance like each month, but sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't. So the woman is the main person in that household. She has to look after the family. She has to provide for them. She's extremely important.
She's the caregiver, and she's the extended caregiver as well, because there's extended families. And I do believe that Tajikistan is 85% Sunni Muslim population. Yes. So what made you choose from Tajikistan? We went to South Korea. What made you choose to travel to South Korea?
So, like I mentioned before, I'm going to be it might have been a very superficial reason, but I just saw lights everywhere. I was like, I want to see these lights for myself. And when I first arrived in South Korea, and I came off the plane and I took a bus to my town, and I just saw all these lights, and I'm like, I am here. I didn't really have any expectations, and yet when I went there, I was like, this is what I wanted, and this is what I got. So basically, it was just something new for me. For me, it's all about experiences. Life is measured by the experiences, and success is measured by the experiences that you have.
Did you meet any Muslims there while you were in South Korea?
So a very strange thing happened. I lived in a very small rural town, and there were 10 foreigners in total. So whenever we walked on the street, it was like, oh my goodness.
There's foreigners.
Yes. We had people staring at us. So when I did meet people, and they were like, and I would not eat the meat, they would be like, why aren't you eating the meat? And I would explain that I'm Muslim, and they were like,
so what?
Yeah, what does that have to do? They had never heard about Islam.
Haven't.
Seeing a brown person to them was like an amazing thing. So hearing about Islam was like, they had never heard about it. Whatever they see on TV is only about Korea.
According to the Global Gender Gap Report, then, it is which measured 134 countries that had succeeded in closing the gaps between men and women in 4 areas. They looked at economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, political empowerment, and health and survival. And I would have to say that these are values and concepts that we can agree are in keeping with gender justice in Islam. So although from these 134 countries, some non-Muslim countries did perform quite poorly, the vast majority of the worst scoring countries are Islamic countries. And amazingly, most of them are Arab states. 17 of the 20 countries at the bottom of the gender gap scale are all Islamic. If you look at the Muslim majority countries like Lebanon, which was placed at 116, Qatar 117, Nigeria, Algeria, Jordan, Oman, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Turkey, Morocco, Benin, Saudi Arabia placed at 129, Mali, Pakistan, Chad, and Yemen 134, right at the bottom of the list. So although there might be progress in some aspects or in one aspect in many of the Muslim majority countries, it's obvious that these Muslim majority countries are lagging in 10 or other aspects when it is related to the development and upliftment of women. Amazingly, 13 Muslim majority countries, however, appeared higher up in the ratings. And amazingly, again, none of these are Arab countries. The 5 scoring the highest was Kazakhstan, which was placed at 41, Kyrgyzstan 51, Brunei 77 on the list of 134 countries, Bangladesh at position 82, and Indonesia at position 87. When we come back from the break, we will then discuss the aspect of the difficulties of having a Muslim identity in a foreign country. Welcome to Finding Me on ITV. Today we have a very special guest, Fathima Wadvallah. Fathima is an amazing individual. She has traveled to fascinating cities. She's been to countries. She's been to Tajikistan, to Palestine, and to South Korea. And if you were with us before we went to on the break, I'm sure you will appreciate the very many challenges that she must have encountered. But Fathima, I would like to ask you, was it difficult maintaining an Islamic identity in a foreign city where there are very few Muslims? And secondly, you mentioned to me about the editor or the journalist who wrote about the 500,000 Muslims in South Korea and the difficulty that she faced as a Muslim revert and a South Korean herself. So if you can just explain that for me.
So I think the biggest challenge was being in a country that was completely ignorant about Islam. And so trying to explain to them or having them understand my religion was very difficult. But in the end, they were very accepting, more so than I expected. I was very clear drinking socially was the norm, even with my boss or work colleagues. And they would... At first, they pressured me, like, come on, it's part of it and everything. And I was very firm that, no, I don't. I don't need to be able to socialize with you. We're talking. I don't need alcohol to be able to talk to you. So that was a big problem, having them pressure me into, trying to drink alcohol. But after a while, they realized that, I was very firm in my convictions that I was not going to do this, along with many other things. And once they see that you know who you are, you respect your... They don't.
They don't cross
and
the
they
board,
respect you more for that.
Tell me about the Muslim journalist or the one who spoke about her.
So, going to Korea, I researched Islam in Korea, and I found out that there's about 500,000 Muslims. That was in 2008, and now there could be more. And I read an article by a South Korean woman who reverted to Islam, and she said how extremely difficult it was being a new Muslim in Korea, being in a country that did not know about Islam and trying to fit in. Firstly, it was very difficult being a woman in a Confucian patriarchal society, and now being a Muslim woman was extremely challenging.
And yet
for
she's
her.
South Korean, right?
Yes, she's South Korean.
So she was always probably feeling more foreign than you felt in her own country. with this identity that she had now embraced.
Probably, because being a foreigner, you can kind of slip into the background. You don't need to be anything. Like, you don't
have to fit in, basically.
At all.
Yes.
But for her, her family, her extended family, her workplace, her friends, I'm sure it must have been an extremely difficult position that she found herself in.
And I think for many reverts, what really helps when they become Muslims, especially in Western societies, is the fact that they have access to the mosques, because there's always a large amount of mosques which you can go to, and you can then get information, resources, and meet a community, develop that sense of ummah. But this must have been really difficult for her.
The positive thing is that the Seoul Mosque does have a good network around it. Like I said, when I arrived, I just contacted them and told them that I'm a new Muslim here, I don't know anybody, could you tell me places to go to, places where I could eat? And the first person who emailed me, I was walking along the street actually, and I asked him, and he gave me his card, and he told me, anything that you ever need, just let me know. And he took my email address, and he was the one who let me know about anything that was happening there. And so that was a very good thing. So for any new Muslims as well in Korea, they do have the support of the mosque.
Okay, then you also went to Palestine. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences in Palestine and the kind of society that's there, the culture, and of course the role of women in Palestine? And which part were you there? Were you in Gaza or were you in the West Bank?
I was in the West Bank, in Nablus, which is a very conservative city, but is also surrounded by all the settlements. So it was a difficult city to live in. Being a Muslim woman in Nablus was less difficult than I had imagined it to be. But of course, that's also defined by the socioeconomic part of society that you come to. Going into the refugee camp was completely different than socializing with friends whose parents were doctors and such. They had studied abroad, they were more liberal, whereas in the refugee camps, unfortunately, it was still plagued by Aryanist customs and traditions, and that's what I'd like to point out. It wasn't about Islam pushing them down. It was about traditions and customs. For women in Palestine right now, the problem is not only political and socio-economic, but it's also civil law. It's still governed by the old Jordanian laws. Even though they've been amended in Jordan, it hasn't been amended by the Israeli courts. So women don't have the rights which they should have. If I have to compare the three countries, Tajikistan, South Korea, and Palestine, even though Palestine and Tajikistan are majority Muslim countries and South Korea is a Buddhist Christian country, the thing that is very similar between the three of them is not actually how religion is suppressing women. It's actually about culture and tradition. So your identity is not so much about being a Muslim, but as being what culture came in before, like, you know, what culture you were born into. And that's a very important point, because even though we want to hold on to our culture, we also need to leave the negative things behind. Another thing about so-called Muslim countries like Tajikistan, where Islam is, we're showing majority, 80% or 82% of Sunni Muslims, but the government encourages women to show themselves in a more traditional manner over an Islamic image. So boys under 18 are banned from going to the mosque because they are afraid of them becoming too Islamic. So it's a very difficult situation that people find themselves into. Where do you turn to, Islam or your culture? And sometimes the two can't be combined.
And that can be very, I'm sure that's difficult.
It turns itself into a very volatile situation.
So as a parting thought, Fathima, what would you like to leave us with? What kind of memory would you like to share with us?
As a Muslim woman who's traveled to a lot of countries, I've faced less challenges than people actually think that women do. If you are strong as a person, as a woman, and you have moral convictions and you show them. And what's important is having a good heart. If you have a good heart and a good character and people know that you are Muslim, they will think more highly of you as a person and as a Muslim than if you're just, you know, a Muslim, going along life, doing whatever, not caring about anybody. It's you having so many ideas coming from all sides, being as a South African, being a Muslim woman. Who do you identify with? You just need to know who you are, and everything else will come along with it.
And I think what was very important is what you shared with me earlier. You said it was more important to be a human first and to react with another individual on the basis of humanity, isn't it?
we need to interact with each other as human beings, not as a Christian and a Muslim. And really the differences will all disappear, because in the end, we all have blood running through us, and it's the same blood. We just need to realize that, and I really think a lot of the problems will be solved.
That's great. And as a parting thought, I would just like to share some other facts with you. When it comes to the difference between literacy rates in adult... Wait. Okay. That's really great. Thanks, Fatima. And as a parting thought, I would like to share some very important facts with you as well. When it comes to the difference between literacy rates in adult women and men, Islamic countries once again score the worst for women. Of the 7 countries with the biggest literacy gaps, 4 are Islamic: Yemen, Guinea-Bissau, Niger, and Pakistan. And of the countries scoring worst for women when it comes to literacy, if you look at it, the majority are Islamic states. So we have to ask, does this make sense? The DISA report also tracks the percentage of women who are represented in parliaments in 2009. Rwanda scored the highest, with 56% of its parliamentary seats held by women. At the other end of the scale, the only countries with no female representatives at all are Islamic, and they are all Gulf Arab states: Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. Again, these should raise substantial questions in any individual's mind, especially when we come back to the founding word or command that came to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Iqra. If it is about Iqra, about reading and participation and empowerment and knowledge and thinking, then why is it that Muslim women are being sidelined? And as Mirza Yawar Beg said, that the greatest harm that has come to the Muslims in the last 200 years is kill the idea. And that's effectively what we're doing. But sadly, it is the Muslims themselves who are killing the idea, and not necessarily the outside influences. So thank you very much, and thank you, Fatima, for being here with me this morning.
Welcome.
It was wonderful to have
Thank you so much for having me again.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. There is only one God. Muhammad is his messenger.